Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pharmaceutical Soccer. I am so excited to be back. It's been a little bit longer for me, but I have, of course, here with Clay Trainum and Valer Shabilla. Here we are, ladies and gentlemen, after a MLS Cup weekend. The MLS season is finally over. How did y'all spend your MLS Cup weekend? Clay, what's going on?
Yeah, it was my wife's birthday. So we went to a restaurant in East Nashville that we'd never been to. We went to go see Casey Musgraves and then we celebrated her birthday, of course, and I watched the MLS Cup final actually with Valaire at a local establishment. And had ourselves a nice little weekend.
Yeah, same here, pretty
I,
much.
I
Well,
will
I
say
didn't.
this, it
Oh,
was funny because we weren't originally planning to go watch the MLS Cup final anywhere because honestly, if it doesn't involve one of my teams, I care a lot less about these things. And uh, I got I got the message from Blair that he's watching. I'm like, all right, let's go do that. And then I asked my wife, it's like, hey, you want to go watch the MLS Cup final? And she goes, like the league that Nashville's in? And I was like, yeah. And she goes, they're still playing? And I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a little bit absurd. So that was the funny part. Also, and Everton didn't didn't lose because the game was canceled, which was a very clutch cancellation considering that I was at a Casey Musgraves concert the night before, and because we didn't get the chance, of course. Shout out to the college football playoff in Indiana's in there, and shout out to the University of Michigan for beating Ohio State, which is always funny. We didn't have an episode last week, so we couldn't bring it up.
okay, that's enough college football talk. Um, yeah, I was gonna say same to Clay, but then I realized I don't have a wife, and I didn't. The imaginary wife didn't celebrate her birthday, so never mind. So no, I just hang out with a girlfriend and some friends, and got to watch MLS Cup. It's good. I mean, we haven't done an episode in like 3 weeks now. I feel like so. uh, so much went on Thanksgiving. Very thankful for all the listeners, I want to say, and very thankful for our Patreon members specifically, and those who have aspiration to sign up as Patreon members. Please do it. It's $5, and not to get the plug out of the way, but just we usually do a Thanksgiving sort of episode, and we didn't this year. So yeah, I just want to say I'm thankful for the people who've been listening to us for the past 6, 7 years and continue to listen to us and support us. It feels like the last 2 or 3 years, I think, if I'm not mistaken, we pretty much went up every year in terms of subscribers and listeners. So we're very thankful for you guys, and we want to keep you. We definitely went up in terms of Patreon members as well. Um, yeah, we want to keep you happy. We want to keep you coming back. So let us know if you have any feedback, and please sign up for the Patreon.
That was very nice, Flair. That was very good. You've been preparing for that one.
And since he was at the MLS Cup final, shout out to Thomas who came up and said hi to both Valaire and
Well, he
me.
wasn't at the game, but he was watching it with us.
Yeah, yeah. The I was all prepared to like dunk on Valera. Like, you haven't said hi to Valera yet, have you? And I was gonna let like not tell him you were there for a moment. And then he looked over and saw you and then just immediately walked away from me.
No, yeah, shout out Thomas. Thank you for saying hi. We appreciate that. As well
Yeah.
as all the other people we talked to that day.
So I have a funny thing for you guys. So over the weekend, I was at a board game convention with a friend of the pod, Jerry, called PAX Unplugged. It was a lot of fun. But Jerry and I are walking around the convention, and we see somebody in a Red Bulls jersey, or a Red Bulls kit. Jerry goes up to him like, "Hey, good luck today," all that type of stuff. I'm excited to see somebody in a Red Bulls kit. He's like, "Yes, I'm a massive Red Bulls fan. I'm so excited for them." All of this type of stuff. And we're like, "Oh, sweet. Where are you watching the game?" His response is, I'm just going to pull it up on my phone while I'm here at the convention. Could you imagine and this is how I understand that the soccer world is so much bigger for us in some ways than other people. Could you imagine your team, I mean, Nashville SC, being in the MLS Cup final and having plans that weekend? Could you imagine?
I can imagine having plans. I can also imagine myself being like, I'm gonna change these plans based on the knowledge based. I'm not gonna watch the game on my phone. I mean, I didn't even have a horse in the fight, and I went and watched it somewhere
I know.
else.
I literally was running to the bar so I could go watch it, and I did not care who won the game. I'm like, sorry, I have to leave this convention so I could go watch this.
So in 2021, the way it worked out is the day that my now wife was going to meet my parents was the day of the MLS Cup final. And Nashville had a really good shot at getting to it in 2021. And it was setting up for an interesting situation for me, especially if Nashville would have ended up hosting, which had they beaten Philadelphia, they would have. So I had to imagine that actually quite a bit just a few years ago.
But yeah,
Yeah,
that's not fan behavior. No way.
yeah, that
Sorry.
was just
Sorry,
wild to
bro.
me. That was really funny.
I have watched plenty of games on my phone. I don't want to like discourage people from doing that. It's just that if Arsenal's playing the Champions League final, I'm not watching it on my phone during a convention. I am finding a way to get out of that convention.
I did have to watch Chelsea win the Champions League final on my phone, but that is because I was in Atlanta watching Nashville beat Atlanta. So that is the reason why I had to watch Chelsea win the Champions League on my phone.
I will say that this speaks to just a difference in the way that people follow the sport in the US, in that like they're their team, but they might not be their number one team.
Right.
And I think that sort of speaks to it because, like, for me, I can't imagine doing something if Nashville's playing, but I can certainly imagine doing having other plans if Everton's playing. And I've been a fan of Everton for much longer than
Even if it's like an FA Cup final or something.
I don't have to worry about that. I'm an Everton fan. So
fair enough. I'm just saying if it's a league game, I'm okay with missing it.
But I'm just saying, like, it speaks to like where people rank them, like in their heads.
Oh, for sure.
So, like, if it's an MLS Cup final, but they have, this board game convention that they're excited about and that they paid money to go to, I can certainly imagine being like, well, it doesn't.
I wonder for that guy if it's like, I don't know if he's fan of like the Rangers or something. Like there's a sport element to it here in America too, where it's like baseball is always going to be this, or football is always going to be this for some people. So yeah, it's an interesting thing about them. Good question.
Well, speaking of soccer fandom, we do have a little bit of time to plan for an announcement that happened over the week when it comes to the Club World Cup matches that are being played, which is super fantastic. Those are occurring in June. Who kind of wants to give just a little bit of an understanding of the Club World Cup and who's coming to play in Nashville?
Yeah, I can take this one. I mean, it's interesting. It's the first time they're doing this event in this way. Obviously, the Club World Cup has existed since I want to say the early 2000s, maybe even late 90s. It existed in a very interesting format, kind of like Confederation Cup type of thing, where each sort of continent will send their representative. This time around, there are 32 teams represented. 12 teams from Europe. There are 4 teams from Asia, 4 teams from Africa, 6 teams from Cannibal, and technically 5 teams from CONCACAF, but it would be 4 otherwise, but because Inter Miami got the host spot. So all that to say, Nashville gets 3 games in the group stage. Unfortunately, nothing in terms of like big European powers coming to Nashville. But in terms of big global world soccer powers, you got Boca Juniors coming to Nashville, which I think would be the biggest name to play in Nashville. Probably in terms of soccer, not excluding national teams. Boca Juniors is probably the biggest name since Spurs and Man City came to play here 2015 or something. I don't know, whenever that was. So 3 games in June, like Steven said, June 20th, the Club Leon of Mexico will take on ES Tunis or Tunisia, however you want to say it. It's a Tunisian team who are really good in Africa.
Well,
And
that is a
then
game you also do not want to miss because that is the return of one John Cadiz to Geodis
that's
Park,
right.
which
That's
would be
right.
absolutely amazing. I would have to steal our friend Ben's John Cadiz kit to wear to the stadium, but I would go.
You, we have to get whoever in Nashville has a John Kitty's jersey to get signed that day,
Oh,
and I hope
absolutely.
he's still on the roster that day. Um, and that's at 5 p.m. on June 20th, and then June 24th, 4 days later. That's kind of the big one here. It's Auckland City FC from New Zealand. No, that's not the big team. The big team is Boca Juniors of Argentina, who, if you're unfamiliar, they are one of the biggest teams in the world. I mean, incredible. They are just a great, great sort of soccer institution, really. Unfortunately, that game is in a weekday at 2 p.m. because, why would anything make sense? But Boca Juniors will be taking on Auckland City in Geodis Park. And the last one is El Hilal versus Pachuca, another Mexican team versus El Hilal, who are a Saudi Arabian team, who Neymar plays for, as well as a bunch of other sort of aging European folks, which could be interesting as well. That's on June 26th at 8 p.m.
The most fun part about all of this is that I finally get to see Boca Juniors in person. So longtime listeners will know that I missed out on seeing Boca in Buenos Aires when my honeymoon never happened, unfortunately. And so shout out to United Airlines. And I am very much looking forward to actually finally seeing Boca in person, which will be fun. And I think for me, like, this goes back to what we talked about with the Champions Cup, right? Like, I'm not expecting these to be really sellouts. I'm expecting a pretty electric crowd for some of these games, but like, this is a chance to see like very internationally relevant clubs playing in a very relevant, as it's lining up to be, where will in the future be a very relevant club tournament. It hasn't really been considered that. They're trying to relaunch it with this, and Nashville gets to be a part of that. And Boca Juniors, who knows when you'll ever see an internationally renowned club like Boca Juniors in Nashville. Who knows when you'll see some of those guys that play for Al Hilal. I'm not going to say it as well as Valer does because he speaks Arabic, but some of the guys that play for these are like legitimate, like well-known world players. It's not just Neymar. You've got Mitrovic there. You've got Ruben Neves. Like, these are guys that have played in massive, massive games over the years. And so you get a chance to see them, playing in Nashville at Geodis Park in the stadium that we got built as fans. And I think it's important to support the events that go there, whether it is a national team event or a team that doesn't, or an event that doesn't even involve NSC, because it shows that Nashville's growing as a soccer city, and it puts you in an environment around teams and around fans who maybe don't have that relationship with the local side. I mean, how many folks came to Geodis Park for the first time when those Mexican teams were coming up through the Leagues Cup? I mean, I talked to several where that was their first time going to Geodis. I imagine that there will be a lot of people like that for Pachuca and Club Leon as well. And we want those people coming back around to support NSC and help build, our relevance and kind of help build our budget over time so that we can watch Nashville play in this tournament, several years from now.
Well, and it is great that this is happening and these events are happening at Geodis Park as well. They haven't announced any sort of ticket information or anything yet, but they have announced some ticket information for season ticket members that are getting some new kind of perks and benefits, which I think is something that is a cool announcement, something that we haven't experienced yet at Geodis Park. Does anybody kind of want to highlight those specifically?
Yeah, it's kind of it's a fairly typical thing. The longer that you've been a season ticket, the more discounts you get. So for us, we were first string members. That means that comes with, a 20% discount in the store. I believe it's a 10% discount on, it might be 15 on food and drinks at the ground, which is great. There's a free tour of the Geodis Park and several other things. But reality is, like, this is something people have been asking for. And the charitable way of looking at it is saying that Nashville is responding to what people have asked for. They want more out of being a season ticket for Nashville SC. Now, the less generous way of looking at it is saying that Nashville really lost a lot of steam with its fan base down the stretch of last season, which is evident for anyone who went to the games. And I don't know the waiting list exists anymore. I think if you want season tickets, you can get season tickets. And so they're trying to sweeten the pot for what season tickets mean. I think this is a really good step in a right direction. And I think that it should be celebrated as a good thing and not looked at as, a less generous trying to like grab onto people and give them more reasons to buy tickets. That's what clubs are supposed to do. And fans are demanding more out of their club, and the club is responding to it. And so I do recommend that if you're looking into season tickets, take a look at it. I have to imagine that these sort of packages will build year over year. And another thing to point to is that a lot of people feel like in the past, probably rightly, that the club has gotten their money and then turned their back on them. That dates back to 1779 club stuff when they're in USL. That dates back to a lot of first string members feeling a certain way once they locked in their season tickets. This is the club literally honoring those wishes by leaving, something special there for the first team members. Now, there was a little bit of a shakeup with emails. Honestly, there's not a huge difference between if you were a 5-year ticket holder or a first string member, but you are recognized within the club as being different than the other long-term season ticket holders, which on a dollars and cents thing is not a big deal, but I do think matters for a lot of people in the fan base who have been around as long as we have. And so I think that is a good step in a right direction for the club from an administrative point, from a outreach to actual season ticket holders standpoint. And I think that we should look at that as only a positive thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree. I'm just going to say yep. Actually, that's all I got for Clay specifically is a yep option. So going to leave it at that. One other thing we do want to discuss just really quick as we're just kind of going through. We were talking about the MLS Cup. Galaxy getting the win in the MLS Cup 2-1. I was having a conversation with Valair about this. If Ricky Pooch was in the match, it probably could have been 4-1. Is crazy how just dynamic and just the way that LA Galaxy passes specifically. I thought it was incredible to watch them win. Valair, was it you that predicted Galaxy to go all the way?
Yes. I'm going to say yes. I'm not positive. I did have them pretty high up in the playoffs, but I might have actually ended up predicting LAFC somehow. So I need to look back at my predictions post the regular season. But overall, I mean, I think one thing to kind of consider here is that the most important thing here is that the Galaxy finished last season 13 in the West. And guess who finished 13th in their conference this season? That's right, folks. Nashville SC. And if that tells us anything, is that Nashville SC is going to win MLS Cup in 2025. No, but in all honesty, I mean, these things, we keep talking about them. Clay, you've mentioned it a million times on this podcast. Things change in MLS really quickly because it's a parity league. And one or two because the margins are so small, one or two things can shift the margins and get you above that line and get you into the playoffs, and then everything from there is kind of whatever, right? And then same thing can be said about the Red Bulls on the other side. They finished 7th in the East. Previous iterations wouldn't even put them in the playoffs, or they would be the last spot in the playoffs in some iterations. So, when you look at these things, there's always some sort of like MLS element to it. And so maybe just take that with a grain of salt.
Worst to first is kind of a joke, is something that happens in other leagues. In MLS, it's a verifiable thing that's happened a lot of times. You can go from being one of the worst to one of the best. I will say this as a comparison to Nashville, maybe it doesn't quite work as well because LA Galaxy went out and they spent a lot of money on 2 big players. They spent more on those 2 players than Nashville spent on all of its DPs combined. So they've put their money where their mouth is, and they've been rewarded for it. And that's only a good thing in this league. The more often that happens, the more people are willing to spend. On the other side of things, Miami spent a whole lot on those players and didn't even get far. So, sometimes it doesn't work out.
And how does Nashville do that? They do that by working on their roster, which we are going to talk about next on Pharmaceutical Soccer. And we are back right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer at Pharma Soccer on our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And as Valère mentioned in the first segment, we do have a Patreon. Even though the season is coming, the season is ended, we're still going to be talking about Nashville SC all throughout the offseason. So please make sure you do sign up for that Patreon. It really does help us do things when it comes to keeping this show running. Being able to do it, as much as we do, even during the off season, even though we'll have a few breaks here and there, we still plan on bringing you this Nashville SC content as much as we possibly can. And you contributing to the Patreon really does help with that. It is $5 a month. Go to our Patreon at Pharma Soccer. So check that out. Also check out our website, pharmasoccer.com, to get all the information together in one spot. Okay, so yes, season is over. Roster decisions are in play, and that also means a lot of roster shenanigans are happening around the league. And we want to be able to help you get an understanding of where Nashville is at in the kind of roster building process. I think our last episode was actually us explaining the roster decisions that Nashville SC decided to take, where it did seem like there was some rebuilding happening within the Nashville SC roster, which we were hoping for. But there's a few things that are coming up that do need to be made aware. First of all, though, Nashville did do something pretty early in the process that we don't normally see Nashville SC doing this early. So, Valère, do you kind of want to describe who Edvard is?
Yeah, Edvard Tagseth. I'm assuming that's how you say it. And you're right, Steven. I mean, Clay has been on this for a while now about how Nashville are making these decisions a little bit earlier than they have in the past, and maybe that is an indication of certain seeds being a little bit hotter than they were, or maybe somebody's sort of trying to prove something. And I do agree with that sentiment overall. Generally, this signing, even if the sort of deal was done, the announcement would come in later. But I think that there's a message there that they're trying to change things, and there is a whole regime change that's happening season over season at Nashville. Anyway, Edvard Tagseth came in from Rosenborg is it Rosenborg? Did I say that? I think Rosenborg. Yeah. In Norway, pretty historic team there in Norway. He is a Norwegian player. He has had an interesting career. He went to England to play for Liverpool's academy. But as things kind of go with these sort of bigger teams, the competition is so hard, and you're competing against so many players from all over the world who are super talented. So if you want minutes in your, especially when players are turning 17, 18, 19, that's kind of the time where you're kind of developing that early stage professional thing. And I think for him to get those minutes, those professional minutes, he had to leave Liverpool, because otherwise he would have stuck in their academy for a little bit. So he did play 1 year at the Liverpool academy, but nonetheless, Rosenborg is kind of his where he claimed most of his minutes. He is a Norway underage player as well. He played, I think, for the under 23s and maybe under 20s as well for them. Overall, he's a center mid of some capacity. It seems like he can play the 8 role pretty well and can progress the ball really well. But he's also capable of doing more of Dax McCarty 6 sort of play, maybe pull the strings and all sorts of stuff. And then something that Mike Jacobs actually noted in the press release of the signing is that he can also play as a fullback, or specifically left back. So I think because that was kind of noted, and because that's something he's done in the past, we know Nashville is somewhat lean on that in the fullbacks area. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him there, though I highly doubt that's where he's coming in to play. I think he's going to most likely be next to Patrick Jasbæk, who also came from the Norwegian League. And he's going to be that connection piece that Nashville has long needed in midfield, where, I'm not going to say he's going to be. The hope is that he is that connection piece that Nashville has long awaited for, where the midfield just doesn't seem to be able to do much moving forward. The last thing I'll say is that this signing is a clear indication of BJ Callahan and the change in the system. What you're looking at is someone signed with a forward-looking eye, if that makes sense, to where Sean Davis, Brian Anunga, while they are capable of doing something going forward, their main signing reason was to keep it organized at the back. This is more so of taking a risk and maybe going a little bit more forward-leaning with it.
And not only that, like outside of just the style of play and production on field, it's a signing with the hope of proving that the international scouting side of things has been repaired. That's been the biggest knock, and it's been a fair one against Nashville SC over the last few years. I think Surge was a step in the right direction. I know that there's some people that were frustrated by him last year. He was a good player for Nashville last year. You hope he's going to take another step going in next year. Yazbek looks the part, hasn't really shown it to the point of saying like it's a guaranteed a good signing yet. And so Nashville's biggest knock is that they've been good signing players in league and not good signing players out of league. And it's a fair knock. And if you take Hani Mukhtar out of the equation, it's a pretty glaring one. And so going out and getting someone early, which ensures that he's going to have a full preseason and set up for success in a way that maybe some of the other international signings haven't been, gives Nashville every chance of this paying off and being a good signing, because they need to show that they can recruit from South America, from Central America, from Europe, from, they haven't really gone outside of that, but from Africa and Asia, there are players that you can get to bring to MLS that can perform. And, they need to make sure that they can do that. And if you take into account, this is like a bit of a way big picture, Club World Cup is coming to Nashville. There might be some players that play in Nashville in those 3 matches that Nashville can go out and get, because those are attainable. Some of those sides have attainable players for MLS. There have been plenty of guys that have come from Argentina to play in MLS. Like, that has happened. And so if you can prove that you can be a landing ground and be successful in Nashville, and the front office can prove that they can scout internationally well, then this could be the start of a changing tide for Nashville signings. But this is the first step. There have to be multiple cases of guys coming to Nashville and being able to perform.
Yeah, and I will say the only signing outside of Europe and South America, now that I'm thinking about it, or obviously North America as well, the only signing outside of that has been for Huntsville, actually. There's been a couple of guys who came in, they're from some African background, or they played in Asia, but they are from Africa. So like there's a little bit there on that end, but we'll talk about that here in a little bit in this segment. But I do want to note one more thing about this Tagseth signing, as well as this Yazbek signing, is that this is starting to look like, and the Surge signing, to be fair, this is starting to look like a trend, because Tagseth is 23. He will turn 24 next month. When you sign players at an age like that, which is the same thing for Yazbek and Surge, there is value in them 2, 3, 4 years down the line, to where when you sign a 30-something-year-old, there's no value in them afterwards. So, so even worst case scenario, if things don't work with Tagseth, he will still be looked at as a 25, 26-year-old, which is much different than somebody who was 34 or 32. So I think there's something there in terms of roster building. And then obviously in terms of like on the pitch stuff, younger players are hungrier generally. They want to prove something. They want to prove a point. It does come with a risk. And I think that's the risk that Nashville is taking at the moment with BJ Callahan of, hey, we're going to get you young guys, but young guys are also inexperienced often. And young guys often maybe make mistakes that experienced players don't. So it's not the complete opposite of Gary Smith. Is not just like, hey, here are like a bunch of 18-year-olds. These are professional players who've played years and professionally. However, it is a step. It is about, I think if you look at the average age of Nashville SC, it probably went down by 5 years just year to year. So, when you're looking at something like that, there's a clear movement to get younger on the roster, and that both allows for maybe better play on the pitch, or like more risk-taking on the pitch, I guess, as well as better business outside the pitch, because these players will remain value even after the contract is over.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting just because, I mean, we've talked about it a lot because we haven't experienced this before with a new coach. We don't necessarily know how this offseason roster building is going to go. We don't know necessarily what is going to happen specifically. Even with this is the first time that we're seeing BJ Callahan and Mike Jacobs work in this way. And a lot of that is going to be happening, throughout this week, which is where I want to get to next. Kind of look, December is the time where a lot of roster building and a lot of planning starts to happen before 2025 comes into play. And this week is really busy. So Valera, do you kind of want to just go over that, just this kind of time and how it is going to happen?
Let's go over them like maybe a couple at a time because there's a lot of different mechanisms. So first and foremost, Monday, December 9th. So this is already passed by the time you're listening to this. But it's a half-day trade window. This allows teams to make trades for like literally 4 or 5 hours. And a lot of this is going to be used because of this next thing I'm going to talk about, which is the expansion draft. So San Diego FC is coming into MLS this next year. And with it comes an expansion draft. They can select up to 5 players from any team in MLS. Each team gets to protect 12 players. And there are some other exceptions, like homegrowns, for example, can't be taken in this expansion draft, and so on. So there's some other details. You can go to BroadwaySports.com, BroadwaySportsMedia.com to see all the specifics. But I'll just go over it really quickly. For Nashville SC, there's gonna be some value in the unprotected list, because that's generally how these things go. But what we have seen in the past is that there are deals made in advance of this, which is what this half trade window would be used for, especially for Nashville SC, that ensured that the team drafting will not take assets that you need. So Mike Jacobs calls up San Diego and says, hey, I'll give you an international spot for $25,000 less, but maybe don't touch our unprotected list. Something along those lines. It's obviously a verbal agreement. Nothing is like set in stone, but we've seen stuff like that happen throughout the league. The other part of the expansion draft, which is happening on Wednesday, December 11th, is that the trade within or after a player is taken. So, for example, in 2020, Nashville took, or 2019, I should say, Nashville took 5 players total. However, 2 of those were traded out, Zarek Valentine and Brandon Vasquez. They were traded out. Zarek Valentine, I believe, came in for Joe Willis, came in for Zarek Valentine. And then for Brandon Vasquez, I think it was an amount of GAM, maybe 200,000 or 300,000. But what the drafting team has to give so San Diego, if they were to take a player from Nashville, all they have to give them is $50,000 in GAM, which is a very low amount when you're talking about these players whose value is higher than that. So all in all, it's an interesting one, even if your team is not involved, because some team is involved, which might have a ripple effect where your team is part of this all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's important, and we've talked about this with every expansion draft that's happened. It's not drafting a player as much as it's drafting resources. And in Nashville's case, they probably should have held on to Brandon Vasquez, but they probably weren't looking to get Brandon Vasquez. They were looking to get money. And that is the way that they looked at it, and that is the way they drafted. So it's which tells me, maybe the expansion draft for an international sport is not really necessary in MLS compared to like WNBA, for example. They just had their expansion draft, a little bit different, dealing with a player pool where the sport is predominantly played, as opposed to an international one where each team can look to various levels of pipelines and development systems for where they're going to build their team out of. So it's a relic of the past, I believe. And I think the fact that it's only 5 picks and the fact that very rarely do teams hold on to more than 1 or 2 of their expansion draft picks shows kind of how much of a waste of time it generally is.
Except when it's done in Nashville, because we did have the best expansion draft party that has ever existed in MLS history. At least better than Miami's.
Yeah, and Dax McCarty came to Nashville because of the expansion draft. So when you think about how important it is for certain teams, you'll see that there's a lot of value here.
Shout out to future Dodger legend at that moment in time, Mookie Betts, who
Who
went to
was also
where?
there.
Who went to where?
John Overton High School, baby. That's right.
And
Bobcats, let's go. He's the second best thing to come out of that school.
and shout out to Derrick Henry, who was also there.
Yeah.
So it was a good time, the expansion
All,
draft.
all things considered, I just want to say that like Wednesday, this expansion draft might not even touch Nashville at all, and might have some involvement. But all things considered, it's just gonna drive into all this whole week of random MLS mechanisms. So end of year waivers comes in Thursday, the day after the draft, December 12th, and there might be some movement for Nashville there, and then that's followed by Friday, which is the reentry window, the first one that comes in. So those mechanisms are for players who aren't qualified to be a free agent yet. So to qualify to be a free agent in MLS, you have to play a certain amount of years and you have to be a certain amount of age. And if you didn't have the service years or the age required to be a free agent, you fall into these sort of different mechanisms. And then the re-entry draft, the second phase of it, it's on December 19th, which is a week after. So I feel like Nashville always has something going on there. It's not a guarantee. Most teams don't use these mechanisms or don't utilize them for anything crazy. But you might see a tweet from Nashville SC that's super confusing. Those are always confusing to me because there's just so much like, the second round of the third round of the second round. And it's like, what does that even mean? All things considered, nothing that's going to nothing that's going to like shatter your brain is going to come out of these days, but they are nonetheless mechanisms that Nashville SC have utilized in the past, and a lot of MLS teams utilize. And then the big one is a day after that second re-entry draft is the Super Draft, which is Friday, December 20th. The Super Draft is the college draft. Nashville SC has always utilized that, successfully in some cases and unsuccessfully in others. I believe they have the 6th pick. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a trade or something along those lines for Nashville SC. But generally, we're not looking to see first team players from the Super Draft unless maybe you have the first or second pick. And then the last bit of roster mechanism is the transfer window, of course, which is when teams can finally make all the transfers, international and domestic. But that date is not set yet. It is set to be in January, probably later in January. But yeah, a lot of movement and a lot of trading is going to be happening, and a lot of discussions and negotiations are going to be happening, even if they're not public. So keep that in mind. This is a process that Nashville SC and most MLS teams have probably started working on in the summer, really, to prepare for this window upcoming. So just because you're not hearing anything doesn't mean that there isn't work being done. It just takes a while for these things to be public.
And especially from a national perspective, please be prepared to not hear anything for a bit. I don't know, though, because we have gotten some of these signings that, a signing announced. Maybe there's a turning of the tide of wanting to get this information out earlier. Who knows? But, yeah, we will see that. Just kind of before we wrap, thank you, Valer, by the way. Appreciate you going through that and giving us the rundown. Before we kind of just wrap up here, Huntsville roster decisions as well. They have made decisions in Huntsville for MLS Next Pro. Do you just kind of want to touch on those really quickly?
Yeah, they only kept 4 players from the previous roster. That doesn't include the academy players. So obviously the academy players are part of Nashville SC organization. So they come up to Huntsville as needed. But they've kept only 4 of their players. And then they also made 2 signings. One of which is internationally, which is what I was alluding to earlier. In terms of Nashville SC, they signed Moises Velez from Panama, and he's here on loan, Huntsville on loan. And this is the sort of area where I think Nashville SC can really utilize of taking a chance on these players, and they've been doing it all throughout. So, if it does come up to something, then good. If not, it's a very, very minimal loss for Nashville SC. But all things considered, there are 6 players on the roster right now. Kessie Coulibaly, Jordan Knight, Patrick Amara, and Ethan O'Brien, who returned from last year. Those four. Moises Velez, who was signed from the loan from Panama, and then Alan Carlton, who was signed from Atlanta United 2, who has played in MLS Next Pro in the past and has scored like 4 goals against Huntsville. I guess they saw him there and were like, we'll take some of that. Clay, you want to make a comment about who Alan Carlton is? Because I feel
I was gonna ask, is he related to him?
He's Andrew's brother. I was just a little bit surprised we didn't wait until January 6th to announce Alan Carlton. And I'll just leave it there.
Yes. Andrew Carlton is a professional soccer player who plays in the United States, and this is his younger player.
It's fun to announce it on the same signing as a Central American player, and I'll just leave it alone.
Oh, all right. Well, hey, let's wrap this up. Let's do our plugs. Thank you guys again so much for listening. Really appreciate it. We're definitely going to be bringing this show as kind of roster news happens. If we do have somebody picked in the expansion draft next week, we probably will record, kind of just figuring it out as we go through. Thank you guys so much for kind of being a part of this journey through the off season. We're still trying to figure out how consistently, we're trying to figure out the show and whatnot. So, plugs, let's just go. Clay, you could start off by giving your plugs, and then I want you to predict who gets picked for Nashville for the expansion draft specifically. What player is going to get picked off of the expansion draft for Nashville?
Okay. Well, first off, you can check me out at Clay Lessel on Twitter and Instagram, and I guess Blue Sky. I have an account. I'm trying to be more active over there, but we'll see. And as for a player getting picked up by a Nashville player getting picked up in the expansion draft, I mean, it would really kind of help Nashville a lot if that player was Randall Leal. So I'll go with that. But I will say it's easier to do these shows more regularly when Nashville has news to report. And fortunately, we have a bit of news this week. Hopefully there'll be a little bit of news next week. And hopefully there won't be anything horribly depressing like when we had to do a live reaction for Alistair Johnston getting traded around Christmas time a few years ago. So hopefully all the news is positive and not horribly depressing. But anyway, at least on Nashville side, it might be horribly depressing elsewhere. So follow me at Clay Lessel on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks. And also check out, I believe it's called Kickin' It 615. I think that
.org.
I think that they do okay work there, I believe. So check them out and check out the Nashville Evertonians. Join us anyway.
Or don't. But for me, at Valer Shabila, I am very active on Blue Sky. I am still posting on Twitter, so if that's your cup of tea, follow me on Twitter. Instagram, Threads, I'm kind of there, I guess. But if you are anywhere on the internet, I'm probably have an account there, except Facebook. So also I want to say that Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, I am kind of putting in some video content lately. So if that's your cup of tea, please follow me on those. I would highly appreciate it. It's a new era for me with that. I keep like trying to figure out how to do video content, and I'm trying not to be corny vlogger, but I'm doing my best. So follow me. I don't know. Maybe I'll stick with it. Maybe I won't, but I would really appreciate any support there. Do I have to say a player?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think anybody from Nashville will be taken, but if I had to guess, it will be Lucas McNaughton. Coming back from injury, it's kind of a risk, but at $50K, I think it's worth the risk. And I don't think Nashville has enough spots to protect him. So that would be my pick.
At PH Steven HD on my... I need a Blue Sky. I haven't made one yet. I'm just behind the times at the current moment. So my Blue Sky will be coming. So just at PH... But follow Clay and Valer before me because they actually do more stuff than I do and are funnier, in my opinion. I get a lot of laughs out of both Clay and Valer's tweets. So good times indeed there. So make sure to do that. I am going to pick that Oh, God, I don't know. Should I make a real life? Yeah. I think Sean Davis might actually get picked. Even though his contract is pretty heavy, I do think he fits a specific system, and San Diego might be the team that needs him. So I'm going to go Sean Davis as my player that gets picked from the expansion draft. So just want to thank you guys so much for listening to the show again. Appreciate it. We'll make an announcement if we'll be back next week or not. Again, we're just following along with the news to see what's happening. But we do appreciate the time. Hope you enjoy listening to this, and then we will be back. Again, thank you so much for listening to Pharmaceutical Soccer. Have a good rest of your day.